Hello, everyone. This is episode 54 of the Justin Files podcast, member of the Broken Jars Network. And today we're going to be talking about the comic books, specifically the first one in the chronological order, Welcome to the Jungle.
Yay! It's happening!
We got fun and games.
Yeah. It took a long time and a lot of nagging on Justin's part, but it's happening.
Oh my god, it was like one of the first topics I submitted when we started brainstorming for that like forever ago.
Like 2 or 3 years by now. It's like, yeah. But we have awesome fans, and some of them made it easy for us to read them. So now we get to discuss it. And so talking about the comics in general is, I think, what we should start out with. Like, they're side stories, not always short stories, but whether or not they're canon, I assume, is a discussion. I think they are. Because
they definitely are, aren't they? There are references to comic book stories in the books, I think.
Yeah, I haven't read all of them yet, so I haven't noticed all those references, but I'm pretty sure they are canon because Jim is directly involved with them.
Yeah, he's written the stories for all of them.
Right, and I wanted to bring up the topic because I feel like I've seen it discussed that way before, and in case you're not sure and you really don't, you don't want to read them and that sort of thing, as far as I'm concerned, they're canon. I don't know, with side jobs, you do get the occasional reference and that sort of thing. But I really think that, with briefcases and with the comics, if you're really not sure and you really need your Dresden fix, this is a great place to get it. Because there are definitely some things that I feel like are going to pay dividends going forward, especially once you get to Warcry.
Here he goes, talking about Warcry again.
Yeah, that's the one.
Have I mentioned how much I like that comic yet? Has it come up ever?
I'm not sure if it's
you really want us to do.
I tell you guys, it's come up in like post and pre-discussion of the show a lot.
Like
we'll
I had to,
eventually.
Yeah, right. I had to go read Ghoul Goblin and Welcome to the Jungle because I was trying to leapfrog it through, and we're probably still only going to talk about one at a time. So, like next Christmas, we'll talk about Warcry, and then you never have to hear about it again.
We can just do like 4 or 5 or whatever it is comic book episodes in a row, and then it's done.
There you go.
Easy.
Sure, we can do that. Easy research. Woo!
Yeah. Even still, it's 3 months, man. So, yeah, it'll be good times.
All right. But when we were talking about the canonicity of the comic books, I was paying attention to the titles. So Warcry does fit the 2-word equal letter on each side theme. Ghoul Goblin does not. And neither, I would say, does Welcome to the Jungle.
Welcome to the Jungle, obviously.
Don't fit that theme as well, don't they?
Yeah. Some of the short stories do, like Love Hurts, I think. Wait, no, that's the wrong number of letters. Never mind. But like Restoration of Faith doesn't match the theme pattern. So.
Right, but you've got like Day Off is the literal name for one of them, right? So
yeah.
They don't always fit, but they often fit, So the quibble that I had with the director off screen was that Ghoul is followed by a comma, so it's still 6 characters and 6 characters. But yeah, like it's not a perfect science, and there are clearly outliers other than just changes as far as that goes.
Yeah,
I think he tries to do the thing, but I don't think he's like religiously attached to it. And the comics, they might be other people deciding or helping. Like we think it should be named this.
So interestingly, most of the comics other than Ghoul Goblin and Welcome to the Jungle, they actually do follow that. So you've got Downtown, Dogman, Wildcard are some of the other ones that we haven't mentioned so far. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, I wonder if there's just an even more important connotation when they don't match. Where it's like this one, maybe it's not, because it's not canon, obviously, but there's something special going on here. Not that I can really think of Welcome to the Jungle or Ghoul Goblin having like a standout theme. There are definitely some nuggets from the world. I think Welcome to the Jungle definitely has some very important themes, though, and that's going to be part of what I'm going to talk about. So,
well, thinking maybe Restoration of Faith and Welcome to the Jungle, they're both before Stormfront. Mm-hmm. And then it seems like he's trying to stick to the pattern after Stormfront a little bit more.
Well, and maybe that's the difference is that, like, whether it's an actual case file or not, in a sense.
Well, I mean, Welcome to the Jungle definitely feels like a case file.
And it should.
So it's not like it's not like Backup, in which, I mean, one, it was Thomas for Backup, and also it's only a snippet of a story. But Welcome to Jungle is the full beginning to end thing, so that
full and very short case file.
Yeah.
Compared to what a book is, right? But
oh man,
I mean, I actually liked the story. It felt very, and it's written by Jim Sorkin, but it felt like it felt like a Dresden Files case file.
Yeah, I was a little shorter. Kind of expecting to dislike it more than I have. Like, there's tiny little things I didn't really like, or I thought it could have been done better. But for the most part, it was pretty good. I expected the story to be done by someone who was not Jim, and then like be given approval. So I thought it would felt different, but it felt very much Dresden-y.
It says they're written by Jim, and I definitely think that. I also think what I liked about the comic was that since it was written for the comic, they took advantage of, there are images. So, for example, there's a part in it where Dresden is like, I think this is the bad guy, and she's like, just because this and this and this and this, and then he just gives her this stare, where there's no words. It's just a picture in the comic book. And I thought it was nice that they used the comic book picture and not dialogue, because it's written for a comic book.
Right.
At the same time, there was a lot more narration than I kind of expected. I thought the story would be told through pictures more, and there was a lot of the noir style narration explaining everything that was happening.
Mm-hmm. One tidbit that I caught this time through, because this is my second time reading it, is that so very early, one of the first pains that you get is the main creature. So pause for a moment, because spoiling everything, right? So the podcast hopefully by now, but if you don't want to hear spoilers about the comic, stop reading. So the main bad guy is a hag, or at least it starts out that way. And so while she's sneaking up on the security guard, you get the dramatic suspension for the comic perspective, in the sense that you see the shadow sneaking up behind him. When Harry does the final confrontation, you can actually see his shadow sneaking up on the hag at the end as well. And I thought that was some nice, like balance to the story and that sort of thing. So there are definitely some things that carry in the visual media that you would have never really gotten from the books.
Yeah, and the visual media, was done fairly well. I personally just dislike the way comics look because of the way that they do colors. For some reason, grates on me. But Harry looked pretty much what I expected him to. I didn't like the fact that it felt like every single woman had the same face. They just had different hair, or they had glasses or something. But it just felt like that Murphy, Watson, and Will all had the same face.
I didn't really catch on that, but I'll have to go take a look at it again. I mean,
it's probably just nitpicking and me being weird, but
I mean, the same face, you think?
It just like all Murphy and Watson and Will, they all felt like they had the same face, just with like different exterior dressings.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think so.
Yeah, I mean, Murphy's face is a whole lot sharper, and there are definitely sharp features on Will, but I thought Will's nose kind of like curved up instead of was just like a point. But I will say that definitely the comics do not get away from Harry being, surrounded by inexplicably beautiful women, because in Ghoul Goblin there's stuff like that too, where it's like, why is she wearing that right now? And I just justify it.
Why does this geek scientist look like a supermodel?
Right. I mean, Will,
she's outside is that it's noir and then it's dressed, and it's also a comic book, and they generally draw the women very attractive.
True. So for comparison, they do include ads for other comics, and that we're not on Marvel's level of holy, boobs Batman and that sort of thing. But, because Bob definitely, why is he not a comic connoisseur at that level? But, the thought I had while watching it was like, what if Dresden just thinks everybody's beautiful, right? And so this is how he remembers you, is he picks out your best features. And I don't know. It's justification, I'm sure. But definitely in the comics, they run that gamut. But for sure, they're not like Wonder Woman, right? Where it's like, she's got other things going on. So.
Yeah. Well, to get into a little bit more of the background of the story, now that we've been talking of our opinions on it, it's so it's between Restoration of Faith and Stormfront. So Harry and Murphy already know each other. Murphy calls Harry in for help because she can't explain what's happened, but it's before she actually trusts him.
Yeah, I actually thought that while she did come off more hostile than the Murphy who trusts Harry, she didn't come off as suspicious as she does in the first couple of books. I don't know if that's just me.
Yeah, it kind of seemed that like she's a little bit more of the familiar Murphy of the later books instead of as hostile as she is in Stormfront or Full Moon when she tries to arrest him and like that.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. That's what I want.
She doesn't punch him, but you could almost argue that this is right after she got her, control over SI, and that he's building her distrust, right? Because things happen in the thing where she's like, if I were a suspicious person, I totally think that you're in on this or have caused this mess, So she doesn't have even enough trust to really be betrayed at this point, in a way, right? Because the main suspect's hideaway gets burned down, and he was the last person on the scene. And so, like, if that had been Full Moon Karen, like, he would have been in the back of a police cruiser in pieces. But it wasn't quite that bad. But at the same time, she's like, I'm gonna give you a little bit more rope. Figure this out.
Yeah, she felt more familiar that way, and it was kind of interesting because I expected her to be more hostile, but it's a good point that she doesn't have enough trust to be betrayed. And he didn't explain anything. He just said, "Yep, that's a good point. Are you going to pay me or not?"
Right.
But it was kind of interesting to see Carmichael. And I felt like, I can't remember, and I haven't had time to go back and look yet, but when Harry meets Carmichael, he says a line of, "Is that a new stain on your tie?" And I think that is a direct line pulled out of Stormfront.
I'm sure it's part of their, tension, right? Because it's probably not new that Carmichael calls him a charlatan, and I'm sure it's not new that Harry gives him shit about his wardrobe. Like, of all the people that dress worse than Dresden, Carmichael's up there. So
yeah.
But it is fun seeing him again and actually getting a physical representation of sorts, because as much as he's a pain in the ass, like, certainly by the time you get around to Ghost Story and even in Full Moon, I feel like he was kind of coming around a little bit, especially during the Loop Guru and all that stuff. It's like, he's another one of those characters that it's great to start off hating him, and then he kind of gets humanized, and he's a normal dude by the end of it. So
yeah. So, Justin, since you're more familiar with it and you like these things so much, why don't you set up the scene that we get onto in the first opening section of the comic and the whole plot stuff?
Right. So I don't have everything broken up into scenes, and I'm no director, so bear with me. But so some of the things that I thought were interesting, and some of the scenes through the comic. So basically, it starts out with a scene from the Lincoln Park Zoo, and basically you start out with a little like pre-credit tease where basically a zoo security guard is getting jumped by what turns out to be a hag, and it's almost like comic book obvious, go figure. But it's all but mustache twirling obvious, because again, you see the hag shadow, and if you're familiar with hags in general, you can kind of guess, okay, which hag, something along those lines. So you find out that they actually name drop the guard, which is particularly important in Dresden usually. So I noted all the names down when I saw it. But he's like the son of a councilman or something like that, to give you the political pressure that kind of resurfaces through the comics and that sort of thing, at least through this comic anyway, because it's 4 issues, right? Mm-hmm. So for this whole story. So he's the dead security guard. He gets his throat torn out by fingers, not claws, which I thought was funny because I had to go back to the front page where the shadow is. It's definitely got claws. So I thought that little tidbit was funny. But basically, so you've got that, and then it cuts to scene, and basically Dresden is in the middle of a case. Like at least the 2 comics anyway, it seems like he's always in the middle of another case, which is half the time what happens in the books anyway, is that he's either wrapping something up or has just wrapped something up, something along those lines. But what I thought was neat is that he's dealing with a rawhead all the way back before Stormfront and everything like that. And so in typical Dresden style and kind of matching with his pre battle status, like really I felt like the first time we truly saw him uncork other than like Pyro Fuego was in Summer Night, where he didn't have any handicaps and he didn't hold back and things like that because he was dealing with like supernatural powers. Here he's definitely cheating. And so like taking down a couple of things, like he doesn't attack the Rawhead directly. The Rawhead follows him out onto some train tracks, and then he knocks down some power lines and electrocutes it. And then, later on when he fights the Hag, parenthesis S, turns out that there's multiple of them, then he kind of goes through that. So the Rawhead, he basically takes out in kind of a cheap shot kind of way, but believable, and using his wits more than his power, which was kind of nice. So we find out that the guard was some councilman's kid, and they're of course under pressure to wrap it up nicely. And because there's a nice little blood trail that leads back to the gorilla enclosure, obviously the gorilla got out and killed the guy, case closed, right? So Dresden, of course, pokes fun at the theory because it's like, okay, so the gorilla got out, murdered the dude, cleaned up half of the evidence, and then locked himself back in the cage. That's your theory? So you get a lot of his snark and a lot of his internal monologues and stuff like that as well. After that, there's a little bit of a montage scene where he goes through and he starts meeting some of the other staff. So he ends up talking to Dr. Dana Watson, who is like the only one who doesn't like throw coffee or something else at him and otherwise chase him off. And she's on loan from London. I guess I don't recall actually getting whatever organization and that sort of thing. So I guess to circle back a little bit, it's the Lincoln Park Zoo, which of course has got me have all those songs in my head now every time I see that. So whatever organization they would be a part of, to kind of match all that up. They find out more about Mo the gorilla. They go and meet with Dr. Reese because he's the guy who's in charge of Mo, basically.
When he started mentioning beer at a point, I thought he was going to go to Max.
Oh, yeah, right? Like every time I'm like, oh, yeah, does he go to Max in this one? No.
I got really excited for a second, and then, oh, no, not Mac.
Right. But he does get beer. So Dr. Reese has beer. How cool is that? The dude has got a mini fridge, and he shares it with people that he likes. So Dr. Reese is kind of a fun character because he also starts out totally irate and, oh, my God, the monkey didn't do it, or, gorilla. Sorry for the derogatory. But anyway, so Dresden basically has to interrupt him, and he's like, I know, Doc. The gorilla didn't do it. So they pretty much start getting on good terms, and then Dr. Reese is also kind of has to do some politicking as well, where he threatens Dresden with tracking down people to tie him up in legal trouble for the next forever. I forget the analogy he uses, something about the heat death of the universe, something along those lines, or until the sun goes out. But he basically has to go start making phone calls and going door to door and whatever, because if the gorilla did it, the police are going to put him down. Mm-hmm. Drama, woohoo! So he says, "Wait here, my assistant Will come help you." Turns out Will is Wilhelmina, and he's a girl. So she's of course. Right. She's, of course, playing the mortal straight in this case. She doesn't believe in magic, blah, blah, blah. And she's also the damsel in distress.
Which I didn't really like. I mean, she was useful for basically one moment, and otherwise she was just a damsel. And obviously the eye candy.
Wait, are you saying this noir book that someone was just a damsel?
Hey, sometimes the damsels are actually femme fatales and all that. It's like, they could be dangerous. She did nothing but hide and scream, and then she talked to a gorilla. It's like, I didn't really like Will.
So help me out. When was she useful again?
There's one moment when the gorilla is angry and she calms him down and guides him back into the cage because she has a relationship with the gorilla because she's the doctor's assistant and all of that.
I really like that gorilla. Right. I would hang out with him.
Right. I mean, before Harambe and all that stuff, he's not too bad, but did you just throw up? Is that
no?
Oh, okay.
Laughing off, scream.
Yeah. But I mean, he even states it in the story. Okay, this is very King Kong as far as the gorilla goes, right? So we have the classic, like the beast could only be tamed by beauty, and he literally references that if I remember correctly.
He references Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, he's like
right.
Straight up.
Yeah, so yes, you're right. I had forgotten she does that thing, and that's right before they get chased by the lions. Is that right?
I think it was after that. It was after they left. They got attacked by something in the car. Then they came back, and the gorilla was out, and they found Dr. Reese dead.
And Monkey gets really upset about it because it likes the doctor.
Right. Yeah. Doctor was my only friend. Right. So to catch you up on like that entire issue, basically. So after he meets Will and they like drop papers and whatever, they get chased by like all of the tigers and lions in the park because there was a mixture of tigers and lions. And they basically get chased by the, alpha male lion. Dresden uses wind magic. He doesn't do the incantation, but you can assume his favorite spell at that point. Pushes the lion into a cupboard, very, Jurassic Park, Velociraptor style. And then they turn around and there's like, 8 more. So his next
cheat... just not fair.
Right, of course. So his next cheat basically is that he pulls the fire alarm and sets off the sprinkler system and disrupts the magic. By now, we can tell they're possessed, and he points this out as well because they've got glowing eyes. And so,
how convenient.
Right, that's how you can tell things, which is funny because later in the book when he does a tracking spell, Will's like, "Hey, is that it?" And he's like, "Really? See, that's the thing about people. If there's no special effects budget, but conveniently when you're possessed, your eyes glow."
Did you notice in that scene where he's casting that spell? There's like CPUs in the magic, and I was like, "What the hell?"
I know. I was really trying to come up with a different explanation, but it very much looked like computer parts.
That was computer parts, 100%.
Right, like little main boards and stuff like that. And I think it's to imply that he's calculating, right, and he's being a wizard nerd. But I think there were better ways to do it. Like you could have done the magical formula because it's not like they didn't show that a dozen times throughout this story. So. Let's see. So after the lions...
While they were being attacked by the cats, Will just hid in a trash can.
Right, which that was like Looney Tunes comical.
Yeah.
Because it's like, do you know how hard it is to get into a trash can? Like, have you ever tried that? Why does
she have blue hair? Like, there's a lot of things about her that's like, why does she have blue hair? Is it meant to be black? Because Harry's hair is supposed to be black.
I think that's a comic book thing. Like, there might be a technical reason even because like your blues and blacks sometimes there's I don't know. It's I don't think it's like Will has blue hair necessarily, but maybe she's the fun and quirky assistant. If we'd caught her on a different weekend, then she would have been the adorable, lovable.
She was definitely quirky, right? She was very rambly,
right?
When he just meets her, like she just goes full motor mouth.
She kind of felt like Sheila.
Right, right. There are definitely some parallels to me there. And I'd have to look up like the publication history to see like who came first, which chicken and which egg or whatnot. But it's like the rambling is kind of like when they go to, Dr. Watson's lab because she's the gal in charge of the lion exhibit, go figure. And she's like, why do you think Dr. Watson had anything to do with it except for she's in charge of the lions and this and that and the other thing. And that's where Andrea's scene that he mentioned earlier, where he just kind of like looks at her and, and it's like, oh, well, I guess that makes sense. It's like that. It seems to line up with means, motive, and opportunity, but whatever. So yeah, somewhere after the lion attack, and they round up all the lions, they go in and investigate her office. I might be getting things a little bit out of order here, but he literally breaks into Dr. Watson's office. So he's got a little pocket crowbar and breaks into not just the front of the building, but also into her office. And then
I really like that line when he breaks in, where he's like, "No door can withstand the might of the Wizard of the White Council, or a guy with a crowbar, and I am both."
Right. not just that, but I love the line. So there's one of his two main references in this book happens in the scene where she's like, "Shouldn't we go get the police?" And he's like, "Cops got better things to do than get killed," which is a great Big Trouble in Little China reference. So if you haven't seen that movie, it's right up Jim's alley, and I'm sure it's not at all the first time we've referenced it, but it appears here as well. So that's a great reference, and they basically go in and find out that Dr. Watson presumably has some magical refrigeration. Don't think about it too hard, and Harry's ice boxes, but basically she's been preserving some jars of blood. And that Bob of course, makes a cameo. So this is how Harry finds out everything magical because he's still kind of retarded. So,
and we also get to see Mister because they have to leave the zoo, go back to his apartment. We see the gigantic cat being held by Mister, and then Harry, and Harry then lumps him onto Will. I did like that moment.
Right.
Like, what do you feed him, sheep?
Right. Yeah, he's shined. Like when they talk about him being a bobcat, like I think he's big for bobcats. Like
he's like one of those. If you've seen those pictures on the internet with like really big Maine Coons, that's like that size. He's like a really like the big Maine Coons where they're like 2 arms to hold the cat.
Right. And like she's definitely bowed under, like Will is definitely bowed under the weight of Mister and everything like that. He is big cat. So for you who like Cinder Spires as well, just kind of think that next time you're trying to imagine
Raoul.
Thank you.
I imagine Raoul big, but not as big as that.
Possibly, but yeah. So definitely we got a big cat, and I mean it could be comic stuff. He's just like comically huge, but I mean Dresden always talks about he is a big freaking cat. So you get to see that. You get to see his apartment, the whole. I love where are your lights? And then he just does flick 'em bickus. And she's like, how the hell did you just do the thing? And he's like, really? Did you think the random tornado appeared for the lion, or that was me too? So they have a nice little moment about that. And then he lights his fireplace. Let's see. So they talk about Bob. Go ahead.
Yeah. When Bob starts talking, oh, so she was British. Was she hot? Was she coming on to you? Can you get laid this time? Very much Bob.
Oh, right. Well, it was great, too, because he's like, well, obviously she's hot because being British and a villain adds a few points, So, yeah. So that they have a great Bob moment, and you get to see the stack of his romance novels, even though you don't get titles and that sort of thing. Like every time books or newspaper was on screen or something, I tried to make out words, but no, it's all comic book writing, or just labels and that sort of thing. So,
but Bob can recognize that they are like the things that Harry brought, like the jar of blood and everything. It's symbols of Hecate and belong to Hecatean hag. And then he comes across that it's an ascension ritual. And I got a little irritated with the fact that it's an ascension ritual because I feel like they're pulling something that's really big and heavy that you need to build up to later out in the front. And then it's just going to kind of not matter as much. A lot like what the TV show did with the Skinwalker, because it arrived so early, it doesn't matter anymore.
And there's a lot of that if this is actually canon and it is from like let's say Prime Universe Harry, since we're about to open up the whole multiverse can of worms, right? Our Harry is Prime Universe for our purposes, but like that's what makes it so hard to put his power level at times, right? Especially because it's like there is no necessary like direct comparison. And I know Butcher has some things about power being nebulous and whatever, and like he talks about that sort of thing. And there's not like it's not a linear progression, but at the same time, like some of the shit that Harry deals with in this comic feels like stuff that would have given him a run for his money, into the later single digit books. Where like just because it's a comic, we drop some things and then move on and whatever. But what was kind of interesting about it, just to fill in some of the details there. So he identifies like the stone that the jar is made out of. Like it's an Egyptian design for the jar. So kind of like the jars they would use in like embalming or something along those lines. And then I forget, I think you pulled this detail out, but the stone was from the Aegean coast, if I remember right. And then when they break the jar, inside they find symbols of the crossroads, which is Hecate. And so he's like, oh, there's a Hecatean hag and whatever, and they cut over to some badass scenes straight out of 300 and stuff like that, where it's like this hag is like tearing people's heads off literally and fighting these Greek armored soldiers and that sort of thing. What I thought was interesting though is like, because it's that Hecate, right?
Yeah.
And when they were like, what do you mean it's an ascension ritual? He's like, well, how do you think she became Hecate? Right.
Yeah. And so it was published in 2008, and it's well before Skin Game, where we realized that Hecate is connected to Mab. And it's like, how much of that history is of Mab, and how much of that is, say, of the mantle that Mab now has.
Right.
Sorry, Andreas.
And I mean but that's a fair point, and that's kind of part of my proto rationalization for it as well, is that this is the creature who became Hecate, went through this ascension ritual. This probably still is not the origin of that mantle. Mm-hmm. And then that mantle is what is changed and went on to be, what we know as Mab today and that sort of thing. But even Mab wasn't originally Mab, and she didn't start out, Mab and all that jazz. So, because we got word of Jim on that, where like Mab is not the same Mab necessarily from Shakespeare, and she's also not like, she wasn't obviously like, I don't know. I feel like we get mixed signals, but she was like a dewdrop fairy, like too, right? And is one of the words of Jim. So
I don't think she was a dewdrop fairy. She's Mother Winter's daughter. It's just that like everyone, they needed to come from somewhere. So Toot is exactly what they were a long time ago, and they're building up, and he could basically be what's the dog's name in Iron Druid series?
Oberon.
Yep.
Yeah,
which is ironic. So yeah,
Toot could become Oberon essentially.
Something along those lines, or maybe he'll replace the Earl King or something. I don't know.
Things like that, yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's kind of the thing, is that there are a lot of supernatural entities on that tier where they started out something much smaller and then became what they are. So there's a lot of that going on, but I thought that was interesting and worth pointing out, because this is something that, knowing what you know about in Skin Game kind of comes back and could pay dividends later. One of the other things that I liked, I guess I kind of omitted, but to talk about it, and one of the things I would like to see if I could research a little bit further, or maybe it's just a screen and there's no real reference, but when Dresden first arrives on the murder scene for the security guard, he goes through a supernatural lineup literally in his head about what kind of monsters have the power and ability to do it, because it turns out, so now that I'm remembering these details, but it turns out that Murphy passingly knew the guard because the guard was in sharpshooting tournaments with her, and so they knew that he could fire fast and accurately, and whatever he had hit didn't go down, let alone leave any blood and that sort of thing. So he starts going through talking about XYZ, including like a red court vampire. So you get to see them without their flesh mask and whatever. But then he starts ruling them out for various reasons. Like the vampire wouldn't leave a big pile of blood. He rules out a troll because a troll certainly could have done it, but the tracks weren't right. Stuff like that. And that was kind of fun. But there's literally a panel of a supernatural lineup that has, like a dude with one glowing eye, almost kind of like the gatekeeper. I thought was kind of interesting, but they seem to be non-humans in each of these cases. And then one of the ones on the far right definitely was a humanoid with a whole bunch of tentacles. So I thought that was interesting. Like, too many to be a mind flayer, but otherwise kind of the right kind of flavor. So
it also looks like it has 6 eyes. I just pulled up the panel, and it's like, that certainly seems... You warned me that I should read Lovecraft before Warcry, and now I'm thinking that, like, I really need to. Crap.
Well, and some of this is going to be mythos, right? And mythos is grown far beyond just what H.P. Lovecraft wrote, because that kind of design, maybe there is something in some of the other works that I'm not directly familiar with, but it's almost something that you would see more in like Hellboy, for example, where it's like just holy crap, a lot of tentacles. But in Ghoul Goblin later as well, like there are some references to some other monsters that I think become very important in Harry's later days, and that's part of where it's like whether the comics are canon or not starts to become important. because these aren't just like throwaway stories. There are actually little details that, like in hindsight, could be important, or at least add flavor to the world and that sort of thing. So
remind me what they were being chased by when they left Harry's apartment to go back to the zoo. We got to see the Blue Beetle, and he basically damaged it a bunch in order to get away, like drove through construction and all of that.
Blue Beetle was pretty blue.
it was actually very blue. Yes. Yeah, it was mostly blue as compared to Ghoul Goblin, which once you read that, then you'll see that. But they were chased by a black dog, and he straight up says, like, out of Celtic mythology, they used to be guardian spirits, and now they're like supernatural muscle, I think is what he said. So
I mean, actually, that's the first time he then. I think the first time he meets a black dog, but there's a reference to black dogs later with the parent and him going off to help with a black dog or something. I think I remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that. I can't remember which book, but yeah, he went off to help with a black dog situation.
Right. So definitely something that comes back. And then, like you said, so they basically get chased through town, and you get a bunch of nice montages for that, including the cover of one of the comics is Harry blind firing his blasting rod at the dog while driving. I thought that was like, holy shit. Like I can't believe that would ever actually happen, but we'll go with it. And then this kind of leads into the next big movie reference, which was Smile, You Son of a Bitch, which I actually had to go look up because it's just one of those that's out there in the ether for the most part, but it's from Jaws. And then he basically blasts the dog into a pile of ectoplasm. And then, he gets out to make sure, in case of double tap, he checks to make sure it's actually dissolving into ectoplasm instead of just, temporarily inconvenienced. So.
Yeah. And so then they get back to the zoo and they find Dr. Reese dead, and Will does her thing with the gorilla. And then he sets up a tracking spell with some of the hag's hair in order to find her, and they went down to Undertown.
Right. So a little bit of tidbit, though, and one of the things that kind of bugged me is that, so they get to Reese's body. Of course, the police have been and probably are still somewhere all around the zoo and that sort of thing because all the shenanigans going on. He uses Reese's glasses to bind the spell, the tracking spell, so that he can see the psychic energy from the hag. And I'm like, well, now you're leaving with evidence of a dead body and haven't told anybody.
What annoyed me the most was actually that he used the glasses so that you could see the path, but he doesn't wear the glasses in the comic strips.
He does actually.
Hold it up to his face. I thought he's just kind of holding it up.
Pretty sure when he chases the hag out again later, it's like no glasses.
Oh, and that in the later scene, I might not have been paying attention, but I think when he finally closes in on the hag, like there's a moment where he kind of like pulls the glasses down a little bit so he can actually see, because wearing other people's glasses isn't as easy as you might think. So,
but that's a really good idea for a tracking spell that he should have. Like, just have some basic dumb glasses with no prescription, and then do that for your tracking spell, because then you can, like, instead of being led around by a compass that's going to lead you through a brick wall, you can see where it's going.
Well, and it's a great Dresden thing to have, like the fake glasses with the nose and the mustache anyway. Like you could totally see him running around Chicago like that. But yeah, it's one of those things where, other than, it's just stupid for him to not reuse it. Like the ointment, for example, like instead of using his sight, there aren't a lot of gadgets that he does reuse, other than his like staple.
The fucking bear belt.
Yeah.
So that, of course, being one of the first things everybody mentions, but there are definitely like a lot of little gizmos that he does where it's like, why didn't he ever reuse that? And
at least they explained the handkerchief of sunlight thing.
Right.
It's explained. So cool with that. But some of the others are just like, that's so useful. Why are you not using it still? You're using so many rings. You keep adding more. Why not use the bear belt?
Right. Yeah. There are definitely things. And I mean, some of it, like I could imagine, headcanon for the bear buckle, in my opinion, is like, it's way tougher and more expensive and less useful than you might think. And because ultimately it gave him a boost for like 5 minutes, and he probably blew like a month's salary on that. So it's like, the cost benefit ratio isn't really there.
It gave him a boost for like an hour or two.
What's the value on his life?
Sure. An hour or two, because I remember it kicking it off, it's blood rights, and he kicks it off to help with the Black Court vampire fight.
Mm-hmm. And then, so he was carrying Thomas into the car. They got to the Wraith Manor, and he's still carrying Thomas, taking Thomas into the room after the whole, like, argument going on with Lord Wraith, and it lasted for at least an hour because of travel time. And then all of a sudden, when Justine went into Thomas's room, it failed and he fell unconscious.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, I guess, I mean, and some of that could be the difference of, like, fuel in the tank versus an actual time duration and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, because maybe if the fight had continued, he would have run out earlier than that hour that he was just trucking around. But
yeah, that's definitely possible.
But yeah, so because we don't have official things, and I'm sure Butcher's like, yeah, that's one of the top priorities I have right after getting peace talks out there. In fact, that's what's taking so long in peace talks, is he's coming up with, explanations for the bear belt. So
I don't really think about it regularly. It's like, oh, this actually annoys me.
It's just funny because it's like you have enough conversations in the community. If you say like one line or ask a question, you know exactly what the response is going to be. Kind of like, may the force be with you. And they say also with you, that sort of thing. Because it's like you bring up magical gizmos. The two things that are going to get brought up are potions and the bear belt. And then if you bring up what happened when, miscellaneous thing that wasn't explained, the answer is time travel. And when you talk about where did so-and-so come from, the answer is a mantle. So just to catch you up on like 80% of where the fandom theories are right now. So I'm not saying that they're all wrong. I just credit Butcher with a little bit more creativity than reusing the same tropes over and over and over again, other than what the genre requires, right? So that's all. Like, sorry, the women aren't going to get any less pretty, especially now that he's hanging out with the Winter Court. Now they're just pretty and deadly. So
at least they have an explanation for being
pretty deadly, actually.
Right. Or, the raw head and the red cat being like ugly as sin. So, let's see.
Undertown, the hags.
Yes.
Because there's multiple.
Another thing that comes up, right? So, like, when do we see Undertown in the main series? It's summer
night.
Yeah.
And
because that's when he meets Maeve and they see the waltzing, right?
And White dance. Night. It came back in White Night.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure it should have been mentioned a lot, but I can't remember those two parts, and I can't remember anything else specifically right now.
Right. So he actually follows the hags into Undertown, and he talks about the history, and he talks about how, some of it's subway tunnels and whatever. And so he does kind of mention the fact, or imply anyway, that it's not necessarily like a contiguous thing, right? It's not like the Underdark. It's just little pockets of Chicago. And I definitely got the feeling from some of the art that it was in a like old subway tunnel somewhere.
Yeah, it definitely looked like that to me.
Right. So then you get his next two cheats, basically. So he sneaks up on the hag and blasts her in the back because he's a dirty, cheating level 1 punk wizard. And I forget, he says something about like, with Bob's description. So, to backtrack there a little bit, Bob basically talks about how their skin's tougher than tank armor and they know more magic than he does. And, they're basically outclass him in every way. Other than looks, for once. Harry finally comes out on top on that. And so he basically takes the cheap shot, and then very shortly after there, Dr. Watson walks in, who he was pretty sure was the hag. So what the fuck's going on? It turns out there's 3 of them. So, boil and toil and trouble and all that jazz. They're literally, using the blood to make a cauldron to do something for the Ascension ritual. Like, I guess you got to drink the blood of 7 different crazy powerful animal totem spirits. Mo was, of course, the last one, right? So they could never get Mo at the time. And then that was where they killed Dr. Reese and all that jazz. And it starts coming together because that's how Dresden works. He's an idiot until like the last 5 minutes, and then everything kind of comes together.
Yeah. And so he's attacking these things that they can withstand so much more stuff, and then he drops a pillar or some piece of ceiling on it, and he gets a little crushed.
Right. Yeah, he knocks out one of the pillars and like the top half and part of the ceiling crushes on it. And then he takes some of the debris from it because they had put a magical circle around their ascension ritual, like you do, and he couldn't disrupt it with magic, so he uses Fazare to throw a giant boulder at the cauldron, knocking it over and breaking it. So one of the hags gets all pissed off and goes to like beat the crap out of him and shakes him like a paint can by his neck. So I imagine that's very hurty, including separation of vertebrae and that sort of thing. But he pulls his revolver in total Dresden fashion and just plugs the hag, which I thought was interesting because it's like we already know that doesn't work, but it totally works this time because we need it to. So
yeah. Bob did say this thing is like, it's the same stuff that'll kill you that will kill them. It's just you need more of it. So he did a point blank shot straight into its chest in order to kill it, and it worked.
Right. And maybe that's the difference is the point blank. But like we saw the security guard basically shoot it. Well, sort of. We of course didn't see it on screen because that's more dramatic and that sort of thing. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And how does he get the last one?
So
no, I remember.
Watson as the hag form, she decides like, well, you destroyed my plans, but I'm going to go kill the damsel. And she goes back to the zoo where Will is still with Mo and starts like, okay, I'm going to kill her right in front of you and be all evil like that. And Dresden gets clever.
Right. So you can almost hear the cackling because hag. But basically, yeah, she's got Will hostage right in front of Mo, and she's like, well, since Will was your ward, you've got some rights. So tell me how you want to see her die. And Dresden at least presumably uses his ring. It kind of looks like that from the comic, but he uses his ring to undo the lock to Mo's enclosure, and then Mo finishes off the hag kind of gruesomely. Like you see it through a shadow off screen. And there are little bits and pieces and arms and legs and stuff like that. But she doesn't make it. So apparently gorillas trump hags. Good to know.
And then Mo quietly goes back into the cage and is perfectly happy.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he's haunted. Like he did see his best friend get killed in front of him. And then he had to do those unspeakable things to that hag. And he's going to lose some sleep. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of sleep.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, again, like one of the things that I kind of liked about the story was that he didn't ever really like brute force any of the monsters except for he kind of did it to the black dog, right? He uses fuego and it was so big and loud and stuff, like there was shattered glass and very Dresden and whatever, but versus the hags and everything, even when he tries, it's not enough, so he has to get sneaky. He knocks out pillars and crushes them and, uses a gorilla. Death by gorilla is a new one on me. So, so that's
arguably that was the one supernatural thing he faced. He was actually stronger than the black dog. I get the impression from when he offhandedly references later in the actual books that the black dogs are not exactly, big muscle. Like they're less than ghouls who are pretty bottom considered for like hirelings, right? Like in terms of raw power level.
Right. Well, because they're thugs, right? So ghouls and trolls and that sort of thing, they're not really bright. They're just brutal. And ghouls have the extra bonus of being super fucking tough to kill. So,
not that super ghouls who are just like
impossible to kill. Yeah, exactly. So none of that at all is going to be important in Ghoul Goblin, though. So you don't have to worry about it.
No worries.
Yeah, he's using his I'm telling the truth face.
Yeah. So that wasn't sarcasm at all. But I mean, as far as the story goes, like it's got a lot of the same thematic elements and, 4 issues long. It's, there's quite a bit of material. So, it's kind of interesting to see things appear chronologically in a story earlier than, what takes place later. And Ghoul Goblin's not going to have less of that. In fact, I think some of that's more important. So if you guys haven't done the comics and that sort of thing, if you want to get a jump on it, there are definitely some world building, aspects that go into some of these comics. And it's interesting to think about it where in the time frame it was, because like you referenced the Skinwalker earlier in the TV show, they used the Skinwalker in the TV show before Turncoat.
Yeah.
Not by a lot, but it is. And so, like, when I realized that, I kind of had to give them a little bit of it, because it's like, how do you take, like, this huge fucking monster that is, like, senior council level powerful at least, and then throw, like, a magic box at it, and that's the end of the story. And part of it is because they pulled something that he hadn't used yet.
Well,
and went with
sort
it.
of. I still have an issue with it because in all of the Navajo stories, skinwalkers are terrifying. Even from the source material, they are like the worst that you can get. So they should have
Right.
made it worse than they did. But they didn't have the Nagloshi from Dresden to go off of specifically. But they still should have done it better.
Sure. And I mean, so, stuff like seeing the Rawhead show up and he's actually faced them before, and then you think to things like Cold Days, where, it's a big beefy Rawhead that he's actually dealing with instead of one of the punk kids. Like the one that he goes off of is just barely graduated from, a carrion feeder and started hunting down animals so I guess one of the details in that is that he's hunting down the Rawhead because his landlady's dog went missing. And so after he electrocutes the Rawhead, he gets the collar out, Fluffy, of course, because it's Fluffy or Fido, but gets the collar and is like, yeah, the landlady's going to be pissed. But I think that's funny and he talks a little bit about Rawheads, how they start out like, the carcasses of slaughterhouses animate, and then they start going after pets, and then they start going after people. So he got it before the people stage. Whereas, like, the one we see in Cold Days is like...
That's like a really old Rawhead.
Right. Like, possibly the Rawhead, for all we know. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so, like, like the one of the Scarecrow.
Right. The phobophages.
Where it was, like, the primal phobophage, and there was also what was his cat assistant? That was the primal...
Cat Sith.
Sith, yeah.
Yeah. Right, and Redcap, right? Because he's presumably not the only fairy running around with a fetish for dipping his hats in blood,
And so Redcap is just like an infamous chi. Like, he's not like, a primal like they are. But the way I think about it is kind of how, if you've ever seen Supernatural, there are like primals of each supernatural, which was in this universe was like born from Lilith, Queen of all monsters, or like Mother of all monsters.
Right.
And then they made lesser monsters later, but they are like the primal monsters. I kind of thought of the Scarecrow, like he's like one of those things, a primal, and then there are lessers.
So you're thinking about like the early part of that season where you've got like the alpha vampire and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Makes sense. So, and to me, it's at least where they got their name, right? Like they invented the style, and then these guys, like you run into the littler ones that were just like, yeah, I like the cut of your jib. We're going to do that too. I like wearing wet hats for some reason. So,
I like the cut of your jib. That red hat thing. That's good.
Yeah. As far as murder hobos go, like the red cap is pretty straightforward, So.
Well, you just gave me an idea for an NPC in a campaign.
There you go. I live but to serve, right?
So now that we've seen the Lincoln Park Zoo before Stormfront, and we'll be going back to it, I assume it's the same zoo. I'm pretty sure. For Zoo Day, do you think there will be references to it?
Oh man, that would be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably see Mo, and that'd be just like a one-line reference to it. But then I really want to know what Mouse might think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I want to know what Mouse thinks of everything. But
I'm just be like just like some sort of like, "What's up, my dude?"
Right.
It's like, I remember you.
So I think there are more than one zoo in Chicago. So it could be. I mean, we've seen the Shed Aquarium, right? Mm-hmm. We've seen the Field Museum. It looks like there's a Brookfield Zoo and a Lincoln Park Zoo, but I'm sure Lincoln Park's like the big one, I guess. So, but it would be interesting to see some kind of reference, like just even a subtle nod. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but that could be cool. So,
yeah, it doesn't seem often that we're going back to the same location. I mean, other than like say Demon Reach, but like we never went back to the Shed Aquarium. We didn't go back to the Field Museum.
Well, presumably, unless something happens there, it's not some place he goes often. He's been to Wrigley Field a few times, hasn't he? Just like around Wrigley Fields.
Right, and that's not 100% accurate because it's kind of a big, like maybe C or D plot. Like it's not the main thing that's going on, but it's a big part of his internal monologue in Skin Game before he finally gets his game face on, is that where Nicodemus was holed up is a place that he's been before. And that the monsters and the supernatural baddies seem to be like going back to the same kinds of roosts and that sort of thing. So I kind of expect he's going to expound on that at some point because it felt like a setup. It felt like I'm teasing something that's probably important and going to come back. But yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised. Like the zoo and like where attacks have happened don't necessarily come back. But he was starting to introduce that concept, and maybe Zoo Crew Electric Boogaloo is going to be where he gets that next part in there where he kind of says, no, really, this is going to be a thing that happens. So, because I can't remember like what the previous thing was. If it was like where the White Council had used that place before, and that's why he recognized it. I
don't remember the warehouse for Skin Game. I don't remember, but there was the reference in Cold Days that backup took place at that same place.
Okay.
With a Stygian sister and the kid and Thomas doing his woo thing. And then he blew that up. So that was the same warehouse. And so it's kind of becoming a pattern by Skin Game, but I don't remember what that was supposed to be.
Okay. Thank you. So
like dark magic like it's there forever. I'm not sure if necessarily because Nicodemus did some shenanigans there. Though, I mean, the devil did help with a big spell at like the aquarium. So maybe it's evil forever now.
That would be kind of interesting. What do evil fish look like? I guess we already know the answer to that because the Fomor. So
yeah. All right.
There are other things with the Fomor. There's fishmen. Well, that is a large part of what they do.
Frost giants.
It's like all kinds of stuff and things. It's like everything, right? Everything that's ever like kind of disbanded. It's like, okay, well, we're part of the Fomor now because why not?
Collection of misfits and outcasts, man.
Yeah, Dresden would fit right in if they weren't all evil.
Right.
All right. Do we have anything else to say or share about Welcome to the Jungle?
I don't think so. I weaved in some of the notes and the important stuff that I had, but a lot of stuff is like, it'd be really cool to talk about Ghoul Goblin, but we're totally out of time. So
yeah, so I told you.
I know.
Thing an hour.
I believe I was the first person to say. I'm pretty sure, like almost, like they will be like an episode each.
There you go. Congratulations.
Help me plug our stuff.
Nice being right, you know.
Yeah, everybody likes being right. Right.
Yeah, right.
So we're part of the Broken Jars Network. The director is part of High Fantasy.
Yep.
Right. Do you got anything fun coming up?
We're having scheduling issues because now we're in the end of the year. We always do.
Yep. Holidays. Curses foiled again. So other podcasts, we've also got Dangerous to Go Alone. We've got Great Scott. Then we've got us. The Long Haul, they've done a couple episodes.
Yeah.
So that's the main materials.
Got a stream, Twitch TV/Lord Batty, if you want to watch World of Warcraft once in a while.
Right.
The live stream.
Lord Batty, right?
Yeah.
Like Darth Batty, Lord Batty.
Yeah, just Lord Batty.
Sounds good.
Like Dark Lord. Except not Dark Lord, it's just because I'm bad. And I wanted something catchy to sound off that. So if people like come in and they're like, oh, this guy's really bad, I can be like, yeah, I warned you.
All right. It's in the name, guys. It says it on the tin. Yeah. Like, what did you want?
All right. Well, that's it for now. So bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.